La Gran Renuncia es auspiciado por Workation Planet, la agencia de retiros empresariales en los mejores entornos rurales de la Argentina. Si eres gerente de una empresa remota o híbrida, te ayudamos a fortalecer la conexión entre tus colaboradores compartiendo experiencias grupales únicas en un entorno de plena naturaleza. Y si eres nómada digital, te invitamos a sumarte a nuestra comunidad para descubrir los mejores destinos de Argentina mientras trabajas. Ingresa a www.workationplanet.co y entérate de todo lo que tenemos para ofrecerte.
Sin Oficina es el lugar donde convertir tus ideas en proyectos y tus proyectos en negocios, rodeándote del mejor talento online. Una comunidad sin spam, sin ruido, sin humo, pero con valores, eventos guapos y mucha pizza. Si querés materializar tus ideas, mejorar los procesos o impulsar tu negocio en un ambiente de colaboración, este es tu lugar. www.sinoficina.com www.sinoficina.com. Animate y salí de la cueva. Workation Planet y sinoficina.com presentan La Gran Renuncia.
Bienvenidos a un nuevo capítulo de La Gran Renuncia. Nuestro invitado de hoy es Jon Younger. Es autor, educador, inversor en empresas en su fase inicial y promotor de la economía freelance. Ha sido profesor sobre el futuro del trabajo en varias universidades alrededor del mundo. Está profundamente involucrado en la expansión de la llamada Freelance Revolution o Revolución de los Autónomos, trabajando con grupos líderes en este tema, tanto en Estados Unidos como en España, Reino Unido, Latinoamérica y Medio Oriente. Ha sido miembro del consejo asesor de varias empresas en su fase inicial. Es cofundador de la organización Human Cloud, conformada por los mejores asesores líderes en la economía del freelance, ayudándola a pasar de estar fragmentada y cerrada a una más abierta y conectada. Se siente orgulloso de ser llamado a menudo el padrino de la Freelance Revolution.
Bienvenidos a La Gran Renuncia, claves para una gerencia remota.
Jon, bienvenido, welcome y gracias por aceptar nuestra invitación.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
Ok, Jon, el freelance ha estado funcionando en vigencia por mucho tiempo, por muchos años, y tú has denominado el Freelance Revolution. ¿Por qué en este momento tú lo llamarías una revolución? ¿En qué se diferencia de los freelance o la situación anterior en el freelancing o los autónomos?
You know, there are. Thank you, Roberto, and thank you, Christian, for inviting me to speak with you today. And it's really a pleasure. I want to thank so many of my friends in Argentina that are involved in the freelance revolution, and say to them what a gift it is to be able to speak to the country right now. Thank you very much for this opportunity. There are two factors that make, I think, this a shift, but it's a funny shift. So let me take 1 minute and digress, if I may. Sure. Roberto, I think a lot of people know that the term freelancer was first used in the book Ivanhoe very long ago, and it was describing the fact that if you were a nobleman without property, as many of second and third sons were, that you were likely to offer your sword or your lance for pay to other noblemen. And that's kind of the first use of the term. It refers to Richard the Lionhearted and that era. But we know that there were freelancing engineers and architects that built the Pantheon in Rome 2,300 years ago. So, of course, many, many years of freelancing. There are two things that have changed. One is that technology now makes it possible for people to not only work from home and deliver work remotely, but makes it possible for people to live where you live and to work in New York, or to work in Paris, or to work in Moscow, or to work in Jakarta, Indonesia. Technology has made it possible for freelancing as a career choice to be global and to not be concentrated where you live. That means that I have much more access to opportunities than I've ever had in my life, because people may say, John, we like the work you do. We're interested in you working with us on a project in Argentina, in Spain, etc. The second factor that is important is that more and more people are saying, that's what I want to do. You know, what we know is that, excuse me, what we know is that 78% of a particular group in the US, most recently, a 78% margin of respondents to a survey said, we would like to be freelancers, except for three things. We're afraid of our income going up and down, volatility. We're afraid to miss benefits, and we're afraid to be lonely. But what we know is that 78% find it attractive, are thinking about the alternative to a full-time job. We went through quiet quitting and then loud quitting between 2020 and 2023. And now what we find is that more and more people are interested in having a portfolio kind of career as opposed to working for one employer all of the time. So on the one hand, more access than ever before to freelancers, more access than ever before that freelancers have to work around the world. And second, what we know is that more and more people are interested in doing that than ever before.
Sí, para ser un freelance se necesita constancia, coraje, disciplina, ciertas características que no todo el mundo tiene para aplicar, y cómo eso se refleja en este incremento en la población que sí está deseando pasarse a un freelance.
You know, when you think about the population in freelancing, it's a little bit of a U shape. So tremendous numbers of people interested in it among Gen Z and among the millennials. Fewer in the era of 45 to 60. And then we see an increase again later in a career as people are considering retirement or moving on or something else and doing something else. So I think part of it is it's a function of where you are. It just so happens that there's a very large population of Gen Zs that see this as a possibility that never before had seen it. When you talk about courage and competence, I think what we're learning is that many of the young people not only have the courage to go out on their own, but are really not very excited about working for a big company. They've seen the layoffs. They've seen all of the things that get in the way of their ability to work flexibly and autonomously and to have agency. And they don't like it. And so the fact that freelancing has made these alternatives possible has really attracted the interest of younger professionals. And then at senior levels, what we know is that organizations kind of want you out. They want you out because you're a little too expensive, because you may not be up to date. They want you out because you may be holding a space that they'd like to give to somebody else. And so we've seen lots of organizations moving people, even an IBM, which said at the age of 55 and above, we'd like to see you move out. Well, that means that they've got to find something else. And so they found freelancing as an alternative to a traditional retirement or trying to pick up side jobs as and where they live.
¿Y consideras que ser freelancer también involucra un nuevo punto de vista sobre cómo vivir, sobre la vida personal?
Wonderful question, Christian. I think that some people really see it as a way to change the way they live. I think we've seen lots of people move remotely. We've seen lots of people in Europe moving to some of the abandoned little towns on the hills and creating communities of that kind. In Spain, we've seen an awful lot of that, and I've actually written about that. We've seen the same thing in Latam, A dear friend of mine who's the CEO of a company lives in Bahia because it's beautiful there and because all the work can be done by phone or video. So I do think that there's a tremendous amount of new flexibility offered by the technology and by a willingness of organizations and people to think differently about how to get things done. I also think that there's an increased interest in what we might call portfolios. You know, Tim Sanders is a senior guy at Upwork, and he has a wonderful line, which I like to share, which is, why would I want to work for one company when I could work for three great ones? Just makes sense.
Sí, y muchas personas que quieren entrar en el mundo del freelance son jóvenes, a diferencia de personas que ya han tenido experiencia en trabajar en empresas corporativas. Muchos freelancers no han tenido esa experiencia por ser jóvenes que están entrando en el mundo laboral y prefieren el sistema o la forma de trabajar freelance de manera del comienzo de su trabajo. ¿Cómo ves esta situación donde los freelance no tienen experiencia en empresas corporativas o otro tipo de empresas anteriormente?
It's tough. It's tough. There's some basic skills that need to be developed that involves working in an organization that's not yours. I totally get it. And so, Roberto, one of the things that we need to do a very good job of when we think about freelancing is we need companies to do a very good job of selection. So when they're thinking about bringing freelancers in, making sure that it's well curated so that we're getting the right people with the right skills, the right experiences, et cetera, becomes very important. I think that for young people, it depends on the field. So, for example, I would be very worried about bringing on board an advertising or marketing specialist who is 22 years old. But that's me. They may be, in fact, just perfect for the new marketing, the new advertising. They may know TikTok more than anybody possible. They may know how to use LinkedIn more than most people. So I wouldn't drop them just because they're young. I would want to know, what experiences have you had? We know that in technology, coding, developing, full stack capability, that these are attractive to young people who have the computational and coding skills. And that's an area where young people can do very well. There are other areas where they don't have the correct experience. And I'll give you another example, which is as independent management consultants. Well, that takes some experience. It takes knowing how to work in organizations. It takes the development of some good cases that I can show you as a client where I've been able to solve a problem in a way that might have been very difficult for others. So those are ways in which I think we can break the age barrier, but there is always going to be a question around, have you had the experiences that make you value added in this environment?
Sí, mencionaste varias plataformas donde se ofrecen los freelancers como Upwork y otras. Pero estas plataformas tienen centenares, miles de personas tratando de buscar el mismo trabajo. ¿Cómo hace o cómo procura el freelancer en estas plataformas tener mayor presencia y ser reconocido?
It's a wonderful question. And here's what I would say to people. If you think that the job of the platform is to get you work, you are wrong. It's no different. Think of a freelance platform as an interactive visual version of the Yellow Pages, because that's kind of what it is. And so once, if you sort of imagine what the platform is responsible for, then we can talk about what they can do to become better connected. The platform is responsible to help their clients identify candidates who they believe can do the job based on their skill set, and their prior experience. That's the obligation of the platform. And so typically what happens is that, let's say I was trying to reach a Fiverr or TopTal or Upwork or any of these platforms, and I wanted to hire somebody to do a job. Well, any of those platforms would say, what's your budget? What are the skills you need? What are the qualifications that you think will be important? Where did they need to work previously? And then they'll recommend 3 or 4 people. They'll curate their opportunities so that they can show an expensive one that may be able to do lots of extra stuff, a good mid-tier person, or a lower cost person who may not be as expert or as experienced as the others, but can do the job. And the role of the client is to make that choice. If you think about what the freelancer needs to do in order to be seen as an attractive candidate, it's the same things that they'd need to do to be seen as a person that you'd want to call in the yellow pages. That they have a very clear identification of what they do well, that they put together a profile that makes them look attractive as a partner, as a work partner, that they talk about the experiences that they've had in accurate, but also in helpful terms. What have they accomplished on behalf of prior employers? What have they accomplished in terms of prior projects as a freelancer? And then they've got to find a way to stick out. It may be by writing something. It may be by participating in a podcast like this. It may be starting a podcast of their own. It may be participating in a webinar of a different sort. But there's got to be some way that that individual will break through and be seen beyond the platform. To be specific, if I were a consultant and I were on the Catalent platform, which is a platform I know well, and I'm an advisor to them, an expert in residence for them, they have 130,000 people on their platform, including people that have done extraordinary things and a lot of people that have done really good things. The challenge of every one of those 130,000 people is to build their own profile, to build their own reputation, to build their own regard within their community so that people will want to work with them. If they can't do that, they probably shouldn't be a freelancer because it's very tough for them to get work.
Algunas personas, algunos periodistas o algunos empresarios dicen que el trabajo remoto en realidad está muriendo. ¿Cómo ves vos este pensamiento, esta postura?
I think that there are a lot of, here's what we know. We know that the typical employee working in an office, spends about 3.5 to 4 hours of their day in productive work. So think about that. I pay you for 8, you do 4. That's not a very good deal. And now think about it from the employee's perspective, which is I may have to drive an hour to get to work. I may have to drive an hour and a half home in the afternoon because it's busy, it's rush hour, etc. So I am not only recognizing that I'm only getting 4 hours of productive work done in the office, but I've also donated 2.5 hours of my life to go to the office. That's not a very good deal, Christian. I think you're seeing an awful lot of people that are saying, my company would like me to be there 5 days a week or 4 days a week, but I don't want to be there 5 days a week or 4 days a week. So if that's going to be the case, I am going to look for a new job. So that's one thing. I think that it's easy to say, come to the office every day, but the reality is you've got to make it worthwhile to people, or they're going to find an alternative employment where they don't have to. What I think we're learning is that most organizations are not saying remote is dead, but they are saying they would prefer hybrid. So for example, if I use the case of Catalent, which I mentioned a minute ago, Catalent has Wednesday in the office. Now, not everybody lives in the Boston area where their headquarters are. And so not everybody comes once a week to the office, but all of the people that are in the general area of their Boston office will come in on a Wednesday or check in on a Wednesday to get that interaction that organizations think is very important. The ability to work, check projects, interact with colleagues, sort of being by the water cooler and staying up to date, et cetera. But I think they're also organizations are understanding that there's incredible value in letting the best people that they have work on a hybrid basis or on a remote basis, if that makes sense. What they're interested in for these organizations is actually getting the benefit rather than the feeling of control that you get when people come back to the office. But remember, 3 to 3.5 to 4 hours is all the work you're getting in general from people at the office. They go out to lunch, they take breaks, they're in meetings that you probably wouldn't have if it was your company. And over time, what people are finding is that some version of remote or hybrid is just making sense. Do I believe that it will go away? No. Do I think there's any evidence that it will go away? No. Do I think that people are inclined to leave organizations that are so determined to treat them in a sort of a neo-colonial way? I think people are leaving those kinds of environments because they're probably pretty negative on other bases as well. If my boss wants to know I'm there all the time, that worries me.
Bien, estás hablando acerca del micromanagement, ¿no?
Yeah. And what we're learning
okay.
is that,
Okay.
and to your point, what we're learning is that if my boss wants me to be around 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, independent of whether that's required or actually in some way proven to be helpful, if it's just because my boss wants to know I'm within reach and I am a top employee, I'm not going to stick around. Would you?
Right.
¿Y cómo enfrentan el desafío las empresas de poder hacer sentir parte de la empresa a los nuevos talentos, a los grandes talentos, para conquistar esos talentos que hay, ¿no? En todo el mundo?
So let me answer that in a very particular way. We did a very large global study, and there are some things that organizations can do. When we asked the question of freelancers, think about a typical client, how well do they understand how to work with freelancers? What we learned was less than 50% of these companies seem to have a good sense for how to work for freelancers. The context of that, Roberto, is that I don't want to be engaged in your company. I want to be engaged in the project. As a freelancer, I'm not making a commitment to your company. You're a client. You're no different than a legal client or an accounting client or a consulting client. I have an obligation to give you my best work. And that's kind of it. That's my obligation. I am not obliged to feel like a member of your organization. I'm obliged to be a good contributor to the project that I'm engaged in on your behalf. So one of the things that becomes important is for people to get clear about what a freelancer should and shouldn't feel about their clients. Here's what we know. Less than 50% of the folks in our global study, freelancers in our global study, felt as if their clients really knew how to work with freelancers, that they understood that they weren't a form of employee, they're a contractor, they're a partner or a joint venture actor rather than a quasi-employee. When we asked, how well do your project managers know how to work with employees? So if you sort of think about freelancing, most of it's project-based. Well, how well do those project managers know how to work with freelancers? Again, less than 50%. So one of the things that organizations can do to make it more comfortable for freelancers is get clearer about the deal. What is it that we're really expecting from freelancers? Why is it you would need us to go to the office versus not go to the office? How important is hybrid versus remote versus in office? How often should we communicate? How often should I give you an update? I mean, all those very basic things that make people feel as though the freelancer is engaged and involved and doing the job expected. The second thing that a company can do is teach its project managers how to work with freelancers. That's an important thing because a freelancer doesn't work for the project manager. The freelancer works as a member of the project team. Very different. And so that becomes important. The third is freelancers like to work with other competent people. And so when you're putting together a team, who are the other members of the team? Are they really the right team members, or are you expecting the freelancer to do more than they should be expected to do as a team member? Are they carrying the team, or are they a member of the team? Have you trained the people that are on the team other than the freelancer to do the right job, et cetera, et cetera? So it's really just, if you want your freelancers engaged, remember that they're in the business of trying to be successful. Because if they're successful with your job, they've got a greater chance to be successful in getting the next job, and maybe an even more interesting job. So create the conditions for them to be successful, create an onboarding so that they understand what's expected, be clear about the rules, train managers to work effectively with freelancers, not to misunderstand the role in the relationship, and to make sure that they're treated as part of the team. It's not a secret recipe. It's very straightforward. We've just got to apply that to freelancers as well as to employees.
Claro, también las compañías deben aprender esto, ¿no?
Yes. And you've raised a very important point, Roberto, because one of the most important things that an organization's leadership can do is really start thinking about the future workforce. You know, if we use the example of the large audit firms, so a PwC or an EY or a KPMG or et cetera, one of the things that they've learned is that they can factor freelancers very productively into their business. And so rather than hiring 80,000 new MBAs or new CPAs, depending on the organization, they maybe hire 60,000 and then make space for 20,000 of those spots to be used by freelancers on a project basis. So if you are an executive of an organization of any size right now, you need to ask yourself, how is the future of work changing the way in which you work, the people that you bring into the workforce, how many of them are full-time, part-time, and freelance? You've got to really think about that stuff so that you're creating a future that is as productive and as cost-efficient as possible. In the old days, we used to hire people for large salaries that we only had that much need for. And so for much of the year, many of these people, very highly paid, were looking for how to be productive rather than really having a high level of demand by the organization of their service. Now these people can be freelance. We pay a small fraction of what we paid as a full-time person, and they're now free to offer their services to many other organizations. That's a win-win. So I think that not only must they figure out how to create an environment that welcomes freelancers, they've got to think about it in terms of their strategy for the kinds of people and the kinds of roles that they've got, where they can use freelancers more expeditiously, more efficiently, and where they really need full-time employees.
Bien, Jon, ¿y consideras que están preparados los países, las políticas gubernamentales para acompañar este nuevo escenario de equipos distribuidos y de trabajo remoto?
It depends. I mean, they're all over the map. And so what you're seeing is, in general, what governments want are votes and taxes, right? That's kind of the essence of it. I want my government to be reelected, and I want to meet my financial obligations by getting as much tax revenue as possible. Historically, Christian, it was easy to get tax revenues through employees of big companies because the big companies collected it and sent it in. It's harder now. And so if you take a look at Argentina, there was an article last year that said that the government of Argentina believed it was losing $3 billion in tax revenues because of freelancers working remotely in the States from Argentina. That's a lot of money. If we want freelancing to grow, we've got to help companies figure out how to get their fair due of taxes. We've got to be able to do it. And so we're going to need to struggle with that issue, because if we can provide them with the taxes, they're a whole lot more willing to support what's going on. Now, there's a second piece, and that is the unions. So the unions have a vested interest in wanting everybody to belong to the union. And so to the extent that unions influence governments, you can imagine why the unions would want to push the freelancers down. And what we do is we see that in the UK, for example, with the IR35. I mean, it's just a law that's basically making it tougher and tougher. We saw it in the United States with the Uber and TaskRabbit stuff. So I think that it will be important to resolve that issue as well. But those are the issues that are fundamentally getting in the way. Do I believe that over time freelancing will become more and more ordinary? Yes. Here's a data point. There are 70 million people in the United States that are freelancing, either full-time or part-time. That's a lot of people. That's essentially half the workforce is in one way or another engaged in freelancing. They're doing it because they can do it. They're doing it because it works for them. They're doing it because it helps them as individuals and it helps them with their career, and they can financially make a living. And what we know is that 65 or 70% of freelancers believe they're doing as well as they would do if employees. So I think it's happening. I think it's going to grow. I don't think it's going to change. I think the Gen Z is going to make it that much more. It's going to press more demands rather than fewer demands. And they've learned a new way of working, Christian, which is remote rather than all together. You know, I'm an old guy. I'm 72. So it's a little hard for me to imagine how you could put a team together that's all over the world and yet it works productively. But the new generation is showing it can be done. And so don't listen to the old farts like me. Listen to the young people.
Hay freelancers que están en Estados Unidos o en países europeos que tienen expectativas salariales altas. Sin embargo, en las plataformas o la oferta de freelancer también viene de países donde el ingreso es muchísimo menor y pues la exigencia o la solicitud de salario o el pago, mejor dicho, es menor. Entonces, ¿cómo hacen las personas que están siendo afectadas por este rango de oferta de costo mucho más económico, mucho más barato que los que están en países donde el costo de vida es más alto?
Si te gusta nuestro contenido, te pedimos que nos ayudes a difundirlo siguiéndonos en Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube o desde la plataforma que nos estés escuchando. También puedes suscribirte a nuestro newsletter podcastlagranrenuncia@gmail.com y te haremos llegar todas las novedades acerca de gerenciamiento y trabajo remoto. Seguimos escuchando La Gran Renuncia.
It's a tough situation, and what tends to happen is that, well, let me use a very specific example. I am a grandfather of 4 young boys. 2 of them, one is 5, one is almost 5, one is almost 3, and one is 2 1/4. And when they are 2 years old, I write a children's book for each of them, and I have it illustrated by a freelancer. The freelancer happens to live in Bangladesh. In the last 3 years since I started doing this, the freelancer's rate has gone up from $140 to $275, $140 to $275. So one of the things that's happening, Roberto, is that they're raising their prices. They're not staying at the lowest possible ebb, and that's good. The second thing we know is that there'll always be a challenge because economies are different, and it's very tough to know, should I hire this person at $30 an hour or this person at $100 an hour? And our bias is almost to think we better hire the $100 an hour because they must be better, right? So one of the things that we're going to have to do in freelancing is get a little more global in certifications. Right now, we're not doing a very good job in certifying or vetting or evaluating on an objective basis freelancers. And so it's much more a function of if you're technical, what stacks do you know, and where have you worked as an employee? That's not very good. We need much better productivity and quality measures. And as we develop productivity and quality measures, what we're going to find is that salaries will start to come together because we're not going to be biased against the Indian population because they're cheap. We'll know which of these men and women are able to really get the job done. We're seeing something else happening in your home country of Argentina, which is that companies like Inclusion Cloud, companies like the Flock, companies like Howdy in the United States are bringing Argentinian, in this case, Argentinian developers up, and they're treating them just as they would treat Americans. And so Jackie, who's, I forgot Jackie's last name, but Jackie that runs Howdy has made an arrangement with the primarily Texas-based companies that their freelancers from Argentina get not only the same pay as other freelancers in the U.S. would get, but they're even giving them time off and other kinds of benefits. We're seeing the same thing in other companies in the U.S. where they're bringing freelancers in on a full-time basis. So they're freelancers, but they are kind of a quasi version of employed. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? While they're freelancers, yes, they are primarily working for this one company and being treated as if they were an employee. So we're seeing different models coming up, whether it's dealing with the Indian or the Thai population, or it's dealing with the Argentinian population. We're seeing the same thing happening in South America, where South African developers are being brought into the EU and being paid well to do that. So it's becoming a very international kind of a thing, and they're working out the differences.
Y puede ser que el freelancer se sienta solo a veces con respecto a qué preparación tiene que tener con respecto a alguna nueva tecnología o el training que tiene que tener para estar adaptado a los nuevos tiempos. ¿Cómo enfrenta eso o cómo trabaja en esta especie de soledad?
You gotta be aware. I'll tell you a story that happened a long time ago, and it's sort of relevant to this, although it's a different field. I was teaching a group of HR executives, and we were talking about strategy and talking about the future of their business, et cetera, et cetera. And I asked, how much time do you spend each week doing research on your company and your company's competitors? Now, you would expect if they were a senior HR person that they would spend a fair amount of time doing that, right? They'd want to know what's new, what's happening in their company. They'd be talking to people on the phone, what's happening, what's new, what's different. what's coming up. And they'd be reading the papers and reading the magazines and talking to folks about what's happening among their competitors. The answer they gave was they spend less than an hour a week. So they're not doing much. That doesn't work very well if you're an employee, and it works even less well if you're a freelancer. You need to stay up to date. That's your obligation. Just like if you ran a bodega and you wanted to learn about new systems of supply chain management and new ways of logistics to get your products into the store, freelancers have an obligation to stay up to date. Now, how do they do that? Well, if you think about Howdy as that example that I gave you a minute ago, Howdy has invested in a facility in Argentina where people can come kind of like a WeWork, and they can provide training and they can arrange coaching and any number of other things. We know that some platforms like TopTal provide training to their freelancers when it's in their interest. In other words, if they know that AI is coming, they'll run training for their folks because it's just in their interest to make sure people understand that skill as well. So you see some platforms investing in the development of their freelancers. You see other platforms saying, we'll give you sort of general webinars on a quarterly basis to talk about generally the market and the skills requirements and what's in demand. And then it's up to you. And then there are some platforms that say simply, it's up to you. So at the end of the day, this is the cost of being an entrepreneur. You don't get handed anything on a silver platter like you did when you worked in an organization. You've got to forge it for yourself.
Jon, ¿hay algún autor que nos puedas recomendar para poder profundizar la temática del trabajo remoto?
Sure. I would recommend the work of Jon Younger. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yes.
He's an excellent writer. Not a great speaker, and he's kind of old, but I think he's pretty good. So I would say read my stuff in Forbes. I think that's valuable. Read my stuff in Forbes. Then what I would say is blogs are a really good source. Platform blogs are a really good source. So if you were to go to TopTal as an example, and they have a blog called staffing.com, you'd read lots of interesting stuff about what's happening. You don't have to pay for that. If you go to Catalent, another company I mentioned, they've just created what they called Catalent Quarterly, which I helped them to put together. And so freelancers are writing articles. In this case, each quarter, it's a different topic. The first quarter just came out, which is AI and transformation. So you can learn a lot by that stuff. I mean, that's on their website. You can check it out, etc. The third thing is listen to podcasts and webinars. They're around and they're important, and people can get a lot of value out of that. Fourth, there are lots of newsletters that are free. Go after them, check them out, and join them. And the last thing is, if you're not part of LinkedIn, be part of LinkedIn, because so much of the stuff happens through LinkedIn. I know that an awful lot of Gen Zs and millennials go to TikTok. I don't spend a lot of time in TikTok, so I don't know how educational it can be. But I know that LinkedIn can be very educational, and it's free. So there's lots and lots of resources available to the individual, but they've got to make the effort. They've got to spend the time. And I would say Jon Younger at Forbes is an excellent writer.
¿Y hay alguna herramienta digital que nos puedas recomendar para el buen desempeño del trabajo remoto?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's good to be in touch. But, that's provided by the platform, right? So I think that might be an interesting thing to get your platform to be part of if it's not already. The other thing I would do, actually, there is I can give you one thing, and that is I'm excited by what I see as a new development in tech, and that is a whole bunch of platforms that are in the content management business. So if I were to give you an example of what I mean by that, you can't see it, but in my closet, you would see a stack of this high of books with my old articles, because I've copied every one of the articles, because at some point, it'll go away. Forbes is going to blow up or whatever, and all of my electrons will be gone. So I thought I'd just make copies of every article. Well, that was 3 or 4 years ago. And I paid a couple of $100 for a virtual assistant to do that job and send it out. Now there are many content management platforms that are either free or very inexpensive that do all that for you. So I'm a member of Authory, and Authory collects all of my articles, and I can go right there to get them. In addition to that, I'm on the advisory board of a new startup called Folio, which is an Israeli company that's not only providing content management, but it's also easily used to create the portfolio that you want to show to a client, or to create the presentation that you want to use to support a client. So I would check out Authory, I would check out Folio, I would check out other content management tools, and then I would go check out Contra, Contra. I'm on the advisory board of that firm as well. And Contra has done a really interesting thing. It's done a joint venture with Canva so that it has fabulous tools to make your stuff look pretty. Now, I'm an old guy. I don't know how to use half of this stuff, but I know that the reaction has been pretty fantastic around that stuff, to have those kinds of tools available. And Christian, you ain't seen nothing yet. Once AI gets serious, I mean, I believe what Sam Altman says, that at some point there'll be a one-person billion dollar company. I also believe Taylor Swift will be the person that does it, but a $1 billion person. $1 billion company run by one individual through the auspices of AI. I mean, I think that's pretty possible. So I think tools are just going to get better and better and better and more available. And, your head is going to keep spinning because of all of the capabilities available to a freelancer from outside. So an example would be, one more company that I'm on the board of is Credilink. Credilink is from Singapore, and Credilink provides embedded credit to not only to e-commerce sites, but also to freelancers. So if you're a freelancer, a videographer, and you need to buy expensive photographic or videographic equipment, or you're a developer and you need that super duper platform, super duper monitor, those are now available to you through embedded credit that you can pull on very quickly. So lots and lots and lots of things are being created for the freelance world. It's very exciting.
Muy bien, ¿y cómo podrían contactarte nuestros oyentes?
Through you. So anybody that wants to write to me, I would love to hear from every one of you. Please contact me through LinkedIn. It's where I spend a fair amount of my time. Jon Younger, LinkedIn, JONYOUNGER. Please write to me. I'd love it. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you're doing. And I'd love to hear what you think I ought to be doing, what I should be writing about. One more thing, Christian, and that is, about a month or two ago, I wrote an article that involved 12 or 13 freelance entrepreneurs from LATAM. And I would encourage people to take a look at it. Jon Younger, Forbes, and it's an article within the last 2 months on LATAM. I will share it with you, and you can make it available to your listeners.
Muchas gracias, Jon, por haber estado en La Gran Renuncia. Muy bien, y en este nuevo episodio de La Gran Renuncia hablamos con Jon Younger en otro de los episodios que hacemos un poquito en inglés un poquito en español, porque sabemos que también hay una audiencia que gusta de estos episodios, no solo anglosajona, sino también de habla hispana, pero que también hablan inglés, así que seguimos trayendo estos invitados que saben y mucho, como es el caso de Jon, que nos habló, en este caso, sobre la economía freelance. Él desarrolla el concepto de freelance en el trabajo de una forma muy detallada, con diferentes estudios, porque, bueno, es un profesional del tema y de la investigación. ¿Cómo lo escuchaste, Robert?
Sí, todo el tema del freelancer, toda la revolución del freelancer va en crecimiento tremendo y bueno, que él comenta que una de las cosas que debe tener el freelancer es una buena red de networking y tomar iniciativa él mismo, ¿no? No esperar que las aplicaciones o las plataformas, digamos, de freelancers se resuelvan totalmente su fuente de trabajo, sino crear networking, esforzarse directamente en hacer los contactos.
Y le mandamos un saludo grande a la gente del coworking La Cañada Multiespacio. Vos sabés que el norte de la provincia de Córdoba, en la República Argentina, es un lugar ideal para venir a hacer tus retiros empresariales. También es un lugar ideal, si sos nómada digital, para venir a pasarte unos días y trabajar disfrutando del entorno, del paisaje, de las sierras y los ríos. Bueno, tenés un coworking ideal para esto, que es La Cañada Multiespacio, en un lugar tan pero tan lindo como es Villa Yardino. Te lo recomendamos. La Cañada Multiespacio tiene un salón de eventos, talleres, tiene oficinas, tiene consultorios y tiene un espacio de coworking espectacular. Están ahí en Boulevard La Cañada 29, Villa Yardino, Córdoba. Tiene una alta conectividad de buena calidad, lindos escritorios, lindos espacios, muy pero muy bien hecho el diseño, así que te esperamos en La Cañada Coworking, en Boulevard La Cañada 29, Villa Yardino, Córdoba. Para comunicarte, 3548 40 90 90. 3548 40 90 90. La Cañada Multiespacio en Villa Yardino, provincia de Córdoba, en la República Argentina.
Amigos, este ha sido un nuevo episodio de La Gran Renuncia. Para comunicarse con nosotros lo pueden hacer a nuestro mail podcastlagranrenuncia@gmail.com. Muchísimas gracias y hasta el episodio que viene.
Escuchaste La Gran Renuncia, un podcast producido por Roberto Schlesinger y Cristian Curto. Si te gustó, hace clic en el botón seguir y nos vemos en el próximo episodio.